So, you've got a guy who conquered pretty much the entire known world by the time he was 33. An incredible feat, right? But there was one enemy he just couldn't beat: death itself. Today, we're diving into one of history's greatest cold cases, the truly mysterious death of Alexander the Great. So how does it happen? How does the world's greatest conqueror, a man who seemed totally invincible, just die? He was only 32 years old, at the absolute peak of his power when it all ended in Babylon back in 323 BC. And for, over 2,000 years, everyone's been asking the same thing. How? Was it some kind of disease? Was it poison? Or could it have been something else entirely? All right, to really get a grip on this mystery, we've got to go back to his final days in Babylon. And let me tell you, his arrival there was just dripping with bad omens and a real sense of doom. Okay, get this. Months before he died, Alexander watched this Hindu sage, a guy named Calanus, literally set himself on fire. And as the flames are, engulfing him, Calanus looks right at the king and says, "We shall meet in Babylon." Super chilling, right? But here's the kicker. Alexander had no solid plans to even go back to Babylon. So these words, they just hung in the air, a prophecy that would follow him all the way to the end.
To have any chance of solving how he died, we first have to figure out who he was. And that's where things get complicated. Alexander was a man of, let's just say, unbelievable contradictions. So you had these two sides of Alexander constantly at war with each other. On one hand, you've got the philosopher king. This is the guy who was taught by Aristotle himself, who supposedly valued logic and self-control. But then you have the other side, the Dionysian tyrant. This was the Alexander who partied way too hard and in one drunken rage actually murdered his good friend Craterus. This lifestyle, it didn't just wreck his body. He started adopting Persian customs, like forcing his own Greek soldiers to bow down to him, this thing called proskynesis. And that made him some very, very powerful enemies. It was an absolutely volatile mix.
So, how did the ancient Greeks make sense of this? Well, they had this concept called krasis. Think of it like a person's inner mixture or constitution. In Alexander's, they said his was just uniquely hot and fiery. Now that fire was the source of all his ambition, his drive, his genius, but it also made him, as one ancient writer put it, bibulous and spirited, which is a fancy way of saying he drank a ton and had a really explosive temper. His own personality was basically a war zone. Okay, so now that we know the man was a walking contradiction, let's play detective. We're going to treat this like a real cold case and look at the evidence. And we've got three main suspects for what or who killed him.
All right, here's our suspect lineup. First up, natural disease. The sentence fit, right? He had fever, chills, crazy abdominal pain. That screams malaria or typhoid, both of which were all over Babylon. And let's be real, his hard partying lifestyle wasn't doing his immune system any favors. Suspect number 2, foul play, poison. Some accounts say he downed a big bowl of wine and then just screamed out in agony. And remember, his turn towards tyranny had earned him a long list of enemies. And then there's our third possibility, a really fascinating modern theory. It involves an autoimmune disorder, and it might just explain the absolute weirdest clue in this entire mystery.
And look, the stories about him being poisoned weren't just some back-alley rumors. They became these epic legends. You've got the Roman historian Justin claiming the poison was so incredibly strong, so corrosive, that the only way to carry it was inside the hoof of a horse. Come on, that's almost certainly not true. But it just goes to show you how seriously people back then believed he could have been assassinated.
But here's where it gets truly bizarre. Whether he died from poison or a disease, something happened next that deepens the mystery tenfold. For 6 whole days after he was declared dead, in the blistering heat of a Babylonian summer, mind you, his body didn't decompose, not at all. Now, the people back then, they thought it was proof he was a god. But what if the real reason is a lot less divine and a whole lot more horrifying?
And that brings us to that modern theory I mentioned, Guillain-Barré syndrome. It's a rare autoimmune disorder, and it can be kicked off by an infection, something like, say, typhoid. What it does is cause progressive paralysis. And here's the truly terrifying thought. What if Alexander wasn't actually dead when they said he was? What if he was just completely paralyzed, locked inside his own body, maybe even still conscious when his generals declared him dead? The reason his body didn't decompose for 6 days? Simple, he was still alive.
You'd think the story ends there, right? Nope. It gets even weirder. The one piece of evidence that could have solved this whole thing, the body itself, well, it basically pulled off one last magic trick. It completely vanished.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up. First, his body is preserved in Babylon for 2 whole years while they build this massive, magnificent funeral cart. Then, as the procession is on its way, it gets hijacked by one of his own top generals, a guy named Ptolemy. Ptolemy steals the body, takes it to Egypt, and buries it in Alexandria. For centuries, it was a huge tourist attraction. Roman emperors like Augustus came just to see it. And then, poof! Sometime around the 4th century AD, it just disappears. The location of the tomb was lost, and the most famous corpse in history has never been seen since.
So why can't we crack this case, even after more than 2,000 years? It's because the mystery of his death is tied to the mystery of the man. You know, was he the brilliant philosopher king who just got unlucky and caught a fever? Or was he the out-of-control tyrant whose own lifestyle finally caught up with him? You can believe any of these theories because, in a way, both of those Alexanders were the real Alexander.
So, at the end of the day, the body's gone. All the witnesses have been dead for centuries. All we have are these conflicting stories and one last question that kind of hangs over everything. After all that, after conquering the entire world, was Alexander the Great just a victim of fate? Or in the end, was he actually a victim of himself?